I'm very, very excited to talk about this Packers-Vikings rematch in the NFC North. Let's start with the Vikings offense against the Packers defense. We've talked about the Vikings offense a ton this year, and it's the Kevin O'Connell show. It's the Justin Jefferson show. It's the Sam Darnold show. I really love watching their film because it just feels so intentional, where you're watching things happen and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. And it's not that your offense has to just make sense for someone watching on film, but they'll get into kind of a snug formation to push Justin Jefferson on the outside to isolate him. They'll get Jefferson moving in specific ways to kind of shift how, just like the geometry of the defense, where Jefferson, he only needs like a small sliver of leverage anyway. I mean, he can beat a player that has positive leverage on him anyway. So if you can add that motion in there, it feels like everything flows from Jefferson just in such smart ways, where you have Addison is able to take advantage of just Jefferson being on the field, which I really, really love. But Kevin O'Connell still finds ways to isolate Jefferson, knowing how defenses want to try and guard him. And I love how much play action they run when things get muddy. Darnold is just totally letting it rip. I think they can be had a bit, I think, up front in the pass game, but still just such a fun unit to watch. What do you have here for the Vikings offense?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned a lot of those things there with what's making this Vikings offense so successful right now, where we talked about Kevin O'Connell a lot coming into the season. I thought he was a good play caller, but maybe not in that elite tier for this year. I've definitely changed my opinion on that after seeing how he's operated this offense with Sam Darnold, where, like you mentioned, like they use play action a lot. And it's purposeful play action where they'll use it in a lot of situations where they really feel like they need an explosive, or they need to calm Darnold down a little bit and get him a little bit of an easier picture on the back end. And that's why we saw that touchdown to Justin Jefferson against the Seahawks to put them ahead in that game. And so you can just really see like it's a very well thought out offense. On top of that, like they've had the eighth best EPA per pass this season. So passing offense has been great, even though the rushing offense has been below average. But what I've also liked is they've had a plus 4.5% pass rate over expected, which is the third highest in the league. And so when you're dropping back and you have a Darnold type quarterback who's playing decent, you have Jefferson and Addison and all these pieces in the pass game, it definitely makes a lot of sense to do that. And then they have the high time to throw, high average depth of target on top of that to really add on to what this offense can offer.
I think someone can look at it and say, oh, you have Justin Jefferson, you have Jordan Addison, you have all these weapons. It's easy to do. But I watch offenses across the league with top end wide receiver ones, and you're still not able to kind of manufacture openings for those guys. So I do really think what Kevin O'Connell, of course, Wes Phillips, and what everyone else is doing in Minnesota is special to watch on a weekly basis. Tej, let's move on here to the Packers defense. Of course, their first year under Jeff Hafley. It feels like they're really settling in. I'm really enjoying this Edgerrin Cooper season. I think he's just going to continue to be a household name at linebacker. You're going to see a ton of zone coverage from them, a lot of four-man rushes, not a lot of blitzing, some bouncing between one high and two high. They can get pretty creative with some of their third down stuff, though you don't see it all the time. They're, of course, responsible for the first and only shutout of the season thus far in that Monday night game over the Saints. What do you have here for the Packers defense?
I'm really glad you mentioned Edgerrin Cooper because he was someone who, showed up really highly in a lot of the linebacker metrics we put out from StatsBomb last year before the draft. So, it's been really nice to see him continue that in the league. And the Packers defense has played pretty well this season, all things considered. What's really interesting about them is they're third in EPA per play allowed, but they're 20th in success rate allowed. So they're a defense that they can force negative plays much more often than the average defense. And, if they did that over like a 4 or 5 game sample, you'd be more inclined to brush it off. But because they've done it over such a large sample, like you can trust this defense to get sacks, to force turnovers because of the aggressive nature that they play. And on the back end, they play a lot of zone coverage and they don't blitz that often, but they're pretty good when doing so. They're just primarily a rush four defense, and that's their way to generate pressure and generate sacks.
And that defense better by EPA, but worse by success rate. A lot of times that can mean you're creating turnovers. As you mentioned, you get those kind of splash tackle for loss type plays. And both of us, I think, we're just fine with that as a mode of defense. Playing defense in the league
Mhm.
is so hard. Playing defense in this game is going to be very hard. But if you're able to, you get one off of Sam Darnold, that is just, it really will be a game changer where, there could be a turnover worthy play there to be had. Tage, let's think about a positive matchup here for the Vikings offense from their perspective. What do you got?
Yeah, positive matchup for the Vikings offense in this game is when the Packers play single high coverage. So like when they have one safety at the top of their coverage structure, I think that the Vikings will have an advantage in this game where you have Sam Darnold, who has had a 0.23 EPA per dropback against single high versus a 0.07 EPA per dropback versus two high. So there's a considerable drop off from his performance versus single high to two high. And teams haven't played a lot of single high against the Vikings because of their pass catchers and because of their aggressive nature to throw down the field. But the Packers do like to play single high. They play it on about 54% of snaps as charted by FTN. So when they're in those structures, I think the Vikings can take advantage of it.
And it's such a difficult issue because if you're going to be a team that, like, your base, your foundation is kind of rotating to single high looks, like that is what you do at the same time. Man, no one wants to do that against the Vikings. Of course, not only just Jefferson, and it's not like you can just kind of cloud his side and not worry about anything. I think that, as I mentioned, Kevin O'Connell does a really good job playing off of that, whether it's Addison to the other side, whether it's Addison to the same side as well. Of course, TJ Hawkinson continuing to get back to full health as well. And if you're going to say, all right, well, you know what, we have to play too high against this team, that does more for your run fits. It asks a little bit more of those guys up front. You're really going to have to take care of business there, where I do think the Vikings with Aaron Jones have found some ways to be able to attack defenses. Also, just like who the cornerbacks overall are going to be for the Packers in this game. Of course, Jair Alexander has had lingering injury issues. There's a bunch of just fun examples from the past of Jair versus Justin Jefferson. Maybe he comes back, has a ton of, gritty in his face in this one as well. Tage, let's think about a good matchup here for the Packers defense perspective. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean the main matchup against the Vikings offense the entire season has been when Sam Darnold is pressured. He has just a huge split in how well he does when kept clean versus pressured. So he is the fourth best EPA per dropback in the league when he's kept clean. So when there's no pressure on him, he's as good as any quarterback in the league. But when there is pressure on Sam Darnold, he drops down to the 23rd best quarterback in terms of production when he has pressure in him, which is the sixth highest drop off between quarterbacks in the league. And the Packers, like we talked about, are a really good defense when they're generating negative plays. And so they have the eighth best EPA per pressure in the league. So when they do get pressure, they can usually close it off with a sack or a tackle for loss. So when Darnold's pressured in this game, Minnesota definitely has to be careful.
And as I mentioned, the Vikings offensive line, you can get after those guys a little bit. It'll be interesting to see what the Packers' plan is overall, because at the same time, the Packers' defensive line is not necessarily the best in the league. So I'm very excited to see just what the Packers do to try and create that pressure. And I know you looked into the pressured versus unpressured numbers. Like it should be expected. Of course, you have a drop off. I'm glad that you mentioned, the relative. He has the sixth highest difference. I think you posted it. I remember Josh Allen has like a positive EPA per dropback when he is pressured, right?
Yeah, he is one of two quarterbacks with a positive EPA when pressured this season. Him and Derek Carr, who's barely
There you
positive,
go.
but still a surprising name to see there. But yeah, I mean that's like the crazy thing with Allen is even if you get pressure on him, even if you play like coverage intact defense, he still generates a positive EPA against those situations.
I mean, imagine being a defensive coordinator and they tell you, hey, you are guaranteed pressure on this play. It's still going to be a negative for you. Look, what a bummer. What are we supposed to do out there? Not the game, not the point that we are talking about right now. Tay, let's move on to just some fun matchups that we're looking forward to here. What do you have from the Vikings offense perspective?
Yeah, you touched on this a little bit with like the safety play, but I think like Jefferson versus the safeties that the Packers have will be really fun. We'll see the Vikings throw deep a decent amount in this game probably. So how the safeties defend it, what type of structures Jeff Halfley uses, I'm very interested to see that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see it, whether it's leaning towards Jefferson, whether it's, are you comfortable isoing Jordan Addison away from him? For me, a matchup I'm really looking forward to is every time Aaron Jones gets a toss and then Edgerrin
Mm.
Cooper is just pursuing it, or even when you get Xavier McKinney kind of working down into the box as well. I mean, watching some of Cooper's run fits against the Saints, it was just really fun. Like he's doing such a high level job of it, dealing with blockers, being able to kind of shed guys and really have high level block destruction. So I am excited for that. I think that will be a fun one to watch. Tage, let's move on here to the Packers offense against the Vikings defense. I mean, the Packers, look, they're awesome, and they kind of have been for most of the season. Matt LaFleur really also pushing himself into the not just like tier one, not tier two, like tier 1A of play caller and play designer. I think they're creative in the ways that they use motion tied to what they want to get to. They're creative in the ways that they get their players the ball. And then they have Josh Jacobs who can also run through your face. I think Zach Tom has had a nice year. It feels like this is a team that when it comes to third and long, again, just from like a vibes from a field perspective, just feels like they're going to have a chance every single time. You're going to get Jordan Love kind of dropping back. He's going to pat the ball once. He's going to look around. He is going to let it rip. Of course, they have such a dominant win over the Saints where I mean, it felt like from the first snap that the Saints almost had no chance getting into that matchup. So I really like that Jordan Love. It feels like he has just kind of like leveled off, I guess, obviously on the positive end, but you're not just seeing as many of those kind of negative plays that are maybe happening a little bit early in the season. Again, he will throw the ball up like that the same way for the Vikings. And I think maybe that's one thing that makes this matchup so fun. These are two quarterbacks that are going to have the chance to throw the ball deep, and the ball is going to be thrown. And like everyone, the camera obviously has like a tighter angle, so you don't know where it's going to go right away. We're going to see who ends up catching some of those plays. They're going to be explosive one way or the other. What do you have here for the Packers offense?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with so much of what you said there, where you look at the stats on the Packers offense, they're eighth in EPA per play on the season, fifth when passing, seventh when rushing. So you have Josh Jacobs playing really well in the run game. And the pass game is just so much fun because Jordan Love barely takes sacks. He throws it deep, and they're able to manufacture a decent amount of yards after catch. So just like a combination of all of that bodes really well for a high powered pass offense. And when you look at their personnel groupings, they're really good out of 11 personnel. They're not as good out of 12 personnel. So just Tucker Kraft is needed on the field. He's a very good tight end. And as long as they stick in 11, mixing in Reed, Wicks, Dobbs, and Watson, as their receivers, like they can do pretty well there. And then Matt LaFleur just hits all the right buttons. He uses motion a lot, uses a decent amount of play action, a lot of RPOs, does a good job of spreading the ball around to his top five receiving options, and I think that's what's led to such successful passing game for them this year. But the question I have for you like when I watch Jordan Love, he throws off his back foot a lot more often than other quarterbacks. I feel like, is that something that you can get away with if you have his arm, or is it because of the structure of the offense? Like, what do you think is the reason for that, and why it's still working for them?
I mean, it's really not something that I would want my nephew to do when he's kind of learning how to throw the ball. You do mention, I mean, the dude's got a laser for an arm, so you're able to get away with certain things when you're doing that. I just think like Love's ability to kind of make plays within the pocket is at such a high level, and part of that is because he can get to some kind of unique angles overall. And you will see it does come back to bite him at times, whether it leads him to kind of dirt a ball or sail one as well. So and I guess it's not something that you are necessarily saying, hey, like Jordan, you can't do this at all, because you also like need it on some of those kind of like really, really high end plays. It's just, it's not for everyone. And like, I always remember
Mhm.
when we watch the pros, like some of the things that they do are so high level that it's just like, yeah, that's not for everyone. So I don't think that's a structural in the offense thing. It's obviously a way you're dealing with pressure. It's not like you don't want to have situations where he can step into it and just let that ball rip, and he's still backing up and throwing off his back foot. That's when I think you would get really worried. As long as you're kind of limiting those plays to situations where like you got a free rusher at you, or you're really getting pressured right down the middle, or you have to kind of evade that in a certain way. But I mean, hey, at the very worst, it's a lot of fun to watch. Another thing that is really fun to watch is the Minnesota Vikings defense. They're fun to watch because it's so hard at times to just like get a tell on them. Of course, they want to find ways to kind of attack the weak side B gap with the linebacker in different ways to kind of handle the ways that offenses want to run the ball. Coverage rotations obviously end up very fun. Some of the ways that they pressure are good, and it just also feels like they have players that are continuing to sort of bump up. Or you of course have Andrew Van Ginkel's versatility. Jonathan Grenard has been a lot of fun to watch all season. Now you have Dallas Turner, who he's I think continuing to improve. He gets that nice interception against Geno Smith in Seattle, and Turner is a player who I mean, he told me, when he was at the lower levels, like he's used to having the ball in his hands. He's used to being a playmaker. And at Alabama, he just dropped into coverage a ton. So, yeah, it makes sense why the Minnesota Vikings would really like a guy like that. It's good to see him kind of continue to improve. And always a reminder, right? The first 8 weeks of a season, of course, you want to see your first round edge rusher really be able to just like beat guys, be able to have a high end pressure rate. But, it can take a little bit of time. So it feels like they've been smart with kind of him continuing to come along, and hopefully he's able to kind of get some of his high end potential. I really hope that Ivan Pace Jr. at linebacker is able to come back into the lineup soon enough. I think they might be activating him off of IR. They may open up his practice window. I forgot exactly what situation they're in, but they've had to use Josh Metellus in different ways because of Ivan Pace Jr. Being out. And it kind of feels like Josh Metellus was born to be in like a hybrid role for Brian Flores defense. So I always love when you have a player like that where, look, if he's on a bunch of other teams, you might say, hey, I'm not exactly sure what his role is, but with Flores, it's so clear what he is doing. And I mean, it's clear because it's unclear because he has to do so many things. What do you have here for the Vikings defense?
Yeah, I mean, don't you feel like that's like so many players on this defense were born to fit in this version of the Brian Flores defense? Like Metellus is a great example. Our guy Andrew Van Ginkel is another one. Like it's really nice to see these types of players that are super versatile like fit into this defense. And yeah, it's a very fun defense to watch. They're second in EPA per play allowed on the season. They're going to blitz a lot at you, and so that'll be something that's fun to watch in this matchup. They're really good when blitzing, and 2 years in a row now where Brian Flores has rushed four, which is like the most common, pass rusher type in the league at the lowest frequency in the NFL. So he's not going to rush four often. It'll be either three pass rushers or five plus pass rushers usually, which is really fun. On the back end, they play a lot of zone coverage. They play a lot of too high. And they're just very multiple, like you mentioned. Like they can just get into so many different types of coverages from so many different formations, and it makes it very hard for the opposing quarterback to tell, what type of defense they're seeing on a snap-to-snap basis.
I always enjoy when they rush five and they just know how to like totally waste a running back from the offense, because now the offense has six guys blocking. The defense can play six pass defenders over just four eligible receivers. So you can be kind of plus one on both sides. You can be, passing off
Mhm.
routes in sort of different ways. And I just think that like the most mature defenses know exactly how to force your running back into protection, particularly if it's a pass catching running back. Or look, like if the Vikings can just win one-on-ones on the outside in terms of pass rush, but if I'm getting a linebacker kind of running full speed at a running back that obviously wants to be, maybe not pass blocking, like if I was a running back, no, get me out in space. I'm trying to have some fun out there. Even if that running back does a really good job kind of stonewalling that player at the line, it usually moves the quarterback off their spot a little bit, or you're able to kind of rebound after that initial block and you're able to create a pressure if your coverage unit can hold up just enough. So I think that will be a fun one to watch. What do you have here as a positive matchup thinking about the Packers offense perspective?
Yeah, so positive matchup for the Packers in this game is when they throw deep. So, like we mentioned earlier, like the Packers like to throw deep. They have the third highest rate of 15 plus air yard passes in the league this year, and they have the second highest EPA when passing deep. So they're really good at it. They have a lot of receivers that can make plays down the field, and the offense is explosive because of that. And when you look at the Vikings on defense, like there's not many areas where they rank outside of the top 10. But the one area I found is they rank 20th at defending deep passes. Now, granted, there is some selection, some survivorship bias here with teams are probably throwing deep when they get the opportunity to do so against this Vikings team. But, just because I think the strength of their defense is what goes on close to the line of scrimmage instead of what's happening further down the field. I think that they can be beat in that area.
You mentioned, of course, the selection bias or just how that works with the Vikings defending deep passes. I will say, just like from a X's and O's on a chalkboard perspective, I mean the Vikings are going to throw so many shenanigans at you, and part of that is, I think, to make it harder for your offense to develop some of those pass concepts. So if your
Mhm.
offense can kind of clog it up inside, you can have those offensive linemen. You can, you unfortunately have to have an extra blocker at some points and find ways to isolate on the outside and throw the ball down the field because whatever the craziness of the Vikings coverage, eventually, it becomes a receiver and a safety or a receiver and a cornerback in space down the field. And if you can have the Vikings defense, that is, I think, where you want to try and get to. Now, that, of course, means, as I mentioned, you really have to be able to pass protect, because if you have, one negative play, think back to the Vikings early matchup with the Packers, where the Vikings jump up to like a 28-0 lead. You have multiple interceptions, you get missed field goals. I mean, the Packers did score 22 points in the fourth quarter. Of course, it wasn't enough. And Tej, I think that game script overall, you assume that that's not going to be the same thing here. I do like the Vikings run defense, but I think that Green Bay should be able to run on them a bit early on. Just, you're staying in that neutral type of game script, and then you're able to get some of those launches from Jordan Love. But hey, I wouldn't be mad if you see it on 1st and 10 on play one. Because as I mentioned, I think that's what you have to be able to try and do against Minnesota. And then it's up to Minnesota. Are they going to just have something so funky that just like totally gets you off of your game? What are you looking at as a positive thing for the Vikings defense here?
Yeah, so positive matchup for the Vikings defense is when the Vikings blitz in this game. It's kind of like a bad matchup for the Packers where you have a Vikings defense that likes to blitz a lot. They're really good when doing so, but the Packers dropped from the third best EPA per dropback when not blitzed to the 21st best when blitzed. So, if the Vikings are sending 6-man pass rushes, which is something that they like to do, the Packers are probably going to be in a bad spot in this game just because they just haven't been that productive when seeing those types of blitzes this year.
Look, I'm excited for every play that Jordan Love is under pressure, because you mentioned that throwing off his back foot. We are going to see that. The ball is going to go down the field. We don't know who's going to catch it. That's just like when you have that sort of thing where I feel like we just know that that is going to happen in this game because of the way the Vikings play, because of the way that the Packers want to play. Just makes it a lot more fun. Do you have any other kind of just fun matchups that you're looking at overall here?
Yeah, I mean, I think like this is a prime spot for an Andrew Van Ginkel like interception or a forced fumble opportunity, just because you're going to be having these 6-man rushes that have been really effective against the Packers this year, and he's a key part of like if they actually rush six or if they drop the edges into coverage and muddy the picture. So I'm hoping that we get a turnover from him because I know that'll make the both of us very happy as well as like the state of Minnesota.
Look, I'm always rooting for good plays out here, too. I'm always rooting for that. Yeah, this game, it has big consequences. If the Vikings lose, they of course drop a game behind the Lions, who will play on Monday night against the 49ers. There's still a fight for the 1 seed. I hope that week 18 Vikings Lions matchup means something, so we get to see the best from both of those teams. And for the Packers, look, they're likely going to be the 6 seed. They might drop to that 7 seed, end up playing the Eagles in round one. So that will be a fun one to monitor.